Hello everybody, today is January 5th, 2019, and I thought I'd make a recording on a topic that I had wanted to talk about for a very long time, but it's such a vast topic that I don't even know where to find a good pivot point to start it, and I'm probably not going to find an end to it either that'll satisfy me, and it's also maybe a little difficult to connect dots and transfer the knowledge that is in my mind regarding this so that you can understand why I am bringing up these issues in the way that I'm bringing them up. And I was now initiated to do this recording by seeing a video of a person that has a channel called Driven Assembly, and he had talked about a book from Machiavelli that talked about the best strategies to take over a country. And I mean, immediately you might think of things like the Trojan horse, for example. That would be a very strategic and crafty way of taking over another strong empire. But what I would like to talk about today is the influence that occultism had on Germany and the Nazi Empire. And I'm gonna explain it to you from a biblical angle a little later on, and I'm gonna make some connections here that probably only a few people have made, but I will further establish and justify the claims that I am making, why I'm making them, and then the viewer can decide if he's interested to confirm if it's true or not, or maybe contribute to what I'm saying and see if maybe it's possible to get to a satisfying solution regarding this topic. Now, I'm starting off this video, and this time it's a screen recording and not prepared sheets that I'm putting over audio. So I'm basically just sitting here, and I've opened up all kinds of PDFs and Word documents where I had gathered information before. To be precise, over the years, and many of these things I didn't even see interconnected, but later on as I studied these different topics, I all of a sudden saw, hold on one second, there are elements in here that connect everything to one another. Because we know that in the Holocaust, and maybe that would be a good way to start this off, if I would just maybe see what happens if I type Holocaust into my web browser and pull up the Wikipedia page here, the Holocaust. And it says, also referred to as the Shoah, was a genocide during World War II in which Nazi Germany, aided by its collaborators, systematically murdered some 6 million European Jews, around 2/3 of the Jewish population of Europe, between 1941 and 1945. So, if you're a Christian, somebody that believes the Bible, immediately you're going to ask yourself why, or let me put it another way, you're going to see the fact established that the Jews, as the flesh and blood descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, obviously were the target of this Holocaust. And as a side note, the Holocaust is derived from the Old Testament being a burnt offering. And probably that's already a little connection that you can make to this being an occult undertaking, meaning initiated by a satanic group, and not merely, as it might look like in history books, simply by somebody that was very nationalistic and just tried to get rid of the Jewish population. But that's the way that it's mostly portrayed, right? That Hitler, as this German guy, kind of came on the scene and brought a nationalistic message, and then in the end they killed the Jews, but just because the Jews were in the way. But it's actually a little deeper than that, And that's what I would like to talk about today. Now, probably, and before I continue, I'm just going to go back to this one picture here. So, some of the stuff that I'm going to mention here is actually from this book from Nicholas Goodrich Clark, and it's based on his PhD thesis, on his dissertation to be precise. And he researched the roots of Nazism in occultism. And so you can see here on this front cover of the book, you see the eagle, a very large eagle. And you see this swastika right here. So, you can find this book online as a PDF if you're interested. And if you briefly look over the chapters, you'll see that it talks about a background, a pan-German vision, an occult revival that was happening, and also it goes into detail about the Ariosophists of Vienna, which is actually Austria. And Adolf Hitler, by the way, was not German. He was Austrian. But then further, where it gets really interesting is when he talks about the so-called Germanenorden. And I am German myself, so I think that I have some very good. I have a very good perspective on this whole matter because I grew up in Germany. And while I'm saying this, I can also show you something else that just came up in my mind. This is probably how this video is going to go. It's going to go. It's not going to be very strategically planned, but just as the things come up. So, not far from where I grew up is a place called Wewelsburg, and this is a triangular castle. So right here it says it's a Renaissance castle located in the village of Wewelsburg. Wewelsburg it's actually called. And this is close to Paderborn. Yeah, it's right here in Germany. And the castle has a triangular layout, and it was used after 1934 by the SS under Heinrich Himmler. And as you probably know, the SS, the Schutzstaffel, was the organization that organized the Holocaust. And it was to be expanded into a complex which would serve as the central SS cult site. So this was actually really going to be the center of this occult Nazi empire. So that probably would be the spiritual heart of it. And I learned about this castle in school because we took a bus trip there on one day in school, and then later when I went to technical school, we took another trip and checked it out. So there is actually, there's also a Catholic church on the premises, which makes you scratch your head. But most notably, and I don't know if they have pictures on this Wikipedia, but yeah, here it is. That's called the Obergruppenführersaal, so the SS General's Hall. And as you can see here on the floor, maybe I can blow this up a little bit. You can see that it has this ritualistic kind of appearance of a ritual site, and in the floor you see the symbol which is called the black sun. Yeah, it's kind of so it's a symbol for the sun, but it's specifically called Schwarze Sonne, the black sun. And I was in that chamber, and you're actually not allowed to take pictures in it because they say that a lot of neo-Nazis would go in and take pictures and, post them on Facebook, and we don't want to support this kind of stuff, they say, and that's kind of how they justify that they don't let you take pictures in there. But then there is another room, and I don't know if they have that in here. They don't. But it's actually, there is a Gruft, it's called. First of all, maybe here we're going to take another look at the black sun. Yeah. Is a symbol employed in a post-Third Reich context by neo-Nazis and some occult subcultures such as Satanism. The symbol design consists of 12 radial mirrored zig runes. So the runes, yeah, those were these Germanic kind of letters, right? Which apparently, as these people thought, had some occult powers attached to them. But yeah, that's where you get that kind of lightning bolt symbol from, the SS. Those are actually these runes. So the Wewelsburg also has this chamber in the basement where they can, what's the right word? Let me see. Wewelsburg, Gruft. Yeah, here you see it. That's actually the ceiling of this Gruft, and I don't know what a Gruft is in English, so let me please take a quick look. Gruft. Vault, crypt, grave, tomb. Yeah. So this is actually underneath this Obergruppenführersaal that we looked at, and that's in the ceiling. So you see this swastika up here. And, you know, they can kind of make a fire there in the middle. So this is from the city of Paderborn. And if you want to check all this out, all you'd have to do is kind of do a right mouse click and say translate into English. And then you can pretty much make sense of these German websites. Or, as we'll see later, Turkish, which will be interesting. But yeah, here you can see they can, you know, light up the fire and have the smoke come up. And, you know, they had all these skull rings that the SS leaders wore. Those used to be set up in this grave vault. So it makes you wonder where they had this stuff from, since this was obviously the driving force behind the Holocaust. And later we're going to touch on the Bible, but first I want to show you this one person that Nicholas Goodrich Clark talks about. So how did they get the Germans to attempt to extinguish the Jews? And, you know, another question that necessarily is connected to it and follows all that you establish when you contemplate this is, why did they do this in northern Germany and modern day Poland? What was there? Why would the Satanists conduct this super Holocaust? I mean, there has never been an attempt like this to extinguish the Jewish race. They talk about 6 million victims, which is a huge number. So it makes you wonder what was there. Why didn't they do it in Brazil or the US? Or why there? What kind of tribes were in Northern Europe? And it's probably a question that you are not going to be able to answer to a satisfying degree, especially when people would like to take it as a established scientific fact. But you could probably find a good pivot point when you think about the fact that the 10 northern tribes of Israel were carried away somewhere, yeah, and never returned. So if you would open up the book of Hosea chapter 1, for example, you could read in verse 2, the beginning of the word of the Lord by Hosea, and the Lord said to Hosea, go take unto thee a wife of whoredoms, and children of whoredoms, for the land hath committed great whoredom, departing from the Lord. So he went and took Gomer, daughter of Diblaim, which conceived and bare him a son. And then it kind of continues, but, just the fact that Hosea takes Gomer as his wife is noteworthy. Because when you look at where Gomer came from, if you type in Gomer in a search engine, you will find that he's the firstborn of Japheth. And Japheth was to be the ruler of nations, yeah? So it's not the Canaanites or the Hamites that, according to the Bible, were to have ultimate rulership over the earth, the tribes of the earth. But according to the Bible, it was Japheth and his oldest son Gomer, which is where you get the Germanic tribes from. So you see that his two firstborn sons were Gomer and Magog. And then Gomer had another son, which was his firstborn, which was called Ashkenaz. And if you type Ashkenazim into Google, it'll show you that Ashkenazi Jews are a Jewish diaspora population, and the traditional diaspora language of Ashkenazi Jews is Yiddish, and it's a Germanic language. So the Ashkenazim were throughout the centuries known as the Germanic Jews, the ones who lived in Germany, because Germany was considered to be Ashkenaz. And so this probably now gives you a pretty good picture of what most likely had happened. And, you could delve into this deeper if you wanted to and Google about the so-called assimilation Jews, which means Jewish people that had assimilated into the Germanic culture over the centuries for some simple facts of just having, an easier life than performing their Judaist religion, which got them a lot of problems, yeah? So, but to bear in mind is that you had a mixture of Germans and Jews up in northern Germany, and obviously a significant number of Jewish tribes. So that's one noteworthy fact. And, the question is, how much is God trying to tell us that that's significant in Hosea? Because Hosea talks about the casting off of Israel and then the regathering in the end. Also noteworthy, as you can see here, Japheth had another son called Magog. And then you see a few other interesting names in here, mainly Javan and Tubal and Meshach. And guess where you find all those? You find all those, and just a side note, we're not going to stay in the Bible here constantly. We're going to go back to Sebottendorf in a second. But just because we're here right now, we're just going to take a quick look at something that these chief enemies, apparently, of Israel that are going to attack everybody in the end is Gog in the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal. Yeah, so, and he brings with him Gomer and all his bands, and the house of Togarmah. And all these are essentially the children here of Japheth. So we're going to take another look later at who this Gog actually is, most likely, and why that's important for the stuff that happened in the Holocaust and Adolf Hitler. But maybe next, let's focus our attention to Rudolf von Sebottendorf. Who was he? So he was born in 1875, and they say, you see there's a question mark here, that he died in 1945, but, you know, there's a lot of facts that point to the idea that he actually didn't die in 1945, but that he lived in Turkey after that. And it says he was a German occultist and that he was the founder of the Thule Society. He was a Freemason, a Sufi of the Bektashi order after his conversion to Islam. So this Thule Society here is actually the society that what's the best term for it? Let's see how they say it. Okay, yeah, they sponsored the German Workers' Party, DAP, which was later recognized by Adolf Hitler, reorganized by Adolf Hitler, into the NSDAP, right? That was the actual Nazi party. And the membership list reads like a who's who of early Nazi sympathizers and leading figures in Munich, including Rudolf Hess, Alfred Rosenberg, Hans Frank, Julius Lehmann, Gottfried Feder, Dietrich Eckart, and Karl Haar. And, you know, Goodrich Clark kind of draws back on making strong conclusions that that Hitler, for example, attended the Thule Society. But, however, the fact is easily established that the Thule Society was the driving force behind the occult ideas, or let me put it that way, mainly to the largest degree you could think of. This is the source of the idea of the Holocaust and, you know, this satanic kind of ritualistic approach to extinguish the Jewish race. You know, and this was also a claim concerning to the origins of the Aryan race, and you know, they had a blood declaration of faith, and I mean, you would just have to read all this for yourself if you wanted to know more about it. But however, the question that probably anybody would ask right away is, well, where did von Sebottendorf get this stuff from? Who was behind this man? And how did he spread all his information, right? And here it says he had a conversion to Islam, which is kind of strange, but it was more like what you would call Sufism. And it says it here, Sufi, which is Islamic mysticism, and the Bektashi order is mentioned, which is a Sufi dervish order of the 13th century. So he was from Hoyerswerda, right? In I believe that's in Saxony in Germany. And he lived in Egypt for a while, right? 1897 through 1900 in Cairo. And then he traveled to Turkey, where he became an engineer, and he actually became an Ottoman citizen, because Turkey, modern-day Turkey, is named after Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, or actually the Turkish race, right? It's named after the Turkish race, but Mustafa Kemal Atatürk was the actual guy that called out the Turkish Republic after World War I. So prior to that, this was known as the Ottoman Empire, and it was a huge empire for a long time, 1299 to 1922. And you can see here how far that empire extended, and it ruled over the Middle East, Jerusalem, parts of Saudi Arabia, yeah, Cairo, and then northern Africa, parts of that, parts of the Balkans, Bulgaria, yeah, north of the Black Sea, here, the modern-day Ukraine. So that was a huge empire, and Constantinople was its capital. And that in itself is a very, very interesting part of history. But the interesting thing is that von Sebottendorf fought in the Ottoman-Turkish Balkan War, and he returned to Germany with a Turkish passport. And he was introduced to occultism and esoteric concerns while he was living in Bursa, Turkey. And, he met the so-called Termudi family, who were Jews from Thessalonica. And they were also Freemasons, and they belonged to this rite of Memphis Mizraim, which we also know today as the Shriner Masons. And this network of lodges was closely connected to the Committee of Union and Progress, which later joined the Young Turks, and that's where it now gets really, really interesting. But one more side note, the Rite of Memphis Mizraim had a German chapter, and if you ever heard the name of Rudolf Steiner, who founded the Waldorf schools and also formulated the ideas of anthroposophy, which came out of theosophy from Blavatsky's occult ideas, he actually was the Grand Master of the Rite of Memphis Mizraim of Germany for several years. A noteworthy fact, because he also taught the doctrine of the inner word and outer word, meaning that the Bible is just a written word and that the real truth is communicated by a voice in the head, which he called the inner word or the living word. And you find this in all kinds of Bible study groups today. That's also found with the Anabaptists and parts of the Mennonites there in the in the 1600s. But that's just a side note, that if that ever comes across to you, or you read we invite the living word to talk to us in the Bible studies, that's actually this esoteric, mystical, occult, Steiner, quote-unquote Christianity. But anyway, moving forward, the Sufi Bektashi order, though, they had a very interesting leader. And his name is Talaat Pasha. Actually, I'm not sure if he was the leader of the Bektashi Sufis, but he was certainly one of them. But what he was, and I don't know if it says this in the English Wikipedia. I gotta browse through this real quick. No, I think it only says this in the German. So sometimes on Wikipedia, it's helpful if you click on another language, and then, like I said, you can just do a right mouse click and say translate to English. But one of the noteworthy things, though, is that he was the last ruler of the Ottoman Empire at World War I. Yeah, so he was the Grand Vizier, whatever you want to call it. He was also the leader of this organization, the Young Turks, right, where von Sebottendorf was connected to with these Termudi, Bektashi Sufi Jews that he got all his occult ideas from. And, here it says it. Talaat Pasha was a Freemason and as such the first Grand Master of Freemasonry in Turkey. He was a Pomakish, right? Pomakish Muslim, and came from a Bektashi family. So, here's your circle closing. And I guess if I go to the Pomakish, maybe I'll find an Oh, Pomaks it's called, okay. So that's, Slavic Muslims. So that's what this guy was. Yeah, he was the last leader of the Ottoman Empire. And Sebottendorf, who founded the Thule Society that brought the occult satanic holocaust ideas to extinguish the Jews to Germany, he discovered in 1912 what he called the key to spiritual realization, described by a later historian as a set of numerical meditation exercises that bear little resemblance to either Sufism or Masonry. So, he kind of developed his own ideas later. And then the DAP, the party that he established, or the Thule Society established, was joined in 1919 by Adolf Hitler. And it says that the guy drowned himself in the Bosporus, right? So that's in Istanbul, where Asia and Europe meet. The Golden Horn, it's also called. And he was an agent of German military intelligence in Istanbul, while apparently also being a double agent for the British military. So that guy was all kinds of different intelligence agents. And he also had an admiration for the SS, who in reality seemed little interested in either, much preferring to talk about the Tibetans. And then you'll find how they also, traveled to Tibet. And there's also a lot of myths in there. Like one myth, for example, says that the Russians, when they came to Berlin in 1945, found, I think, 1,000 Tibetan monks who died by suicide in a ritualistic manner, and that their leader had green gloves on his hands. But, all that I was able to do is email the Russian in Moscow, the Russian Museum of Military, but they never replied. I just asked them if they could confirm the story or not. So who knows if that's true or not. But von Sebottendorf, as you can see in the Turkish Wikipedia article, which is significantly longer, and that's also noteworthy, than the German or the English one. And there were pictures in here. Right, here it is. So that's him. And here he is with a guy called Nuri Kiligil and Ramsey Denker. And I think there's another one. Yeah, here it is. Again, with Nuri Kiligil and Ramsey Denker. So who was Nuri? Nuri was also known as Nuri Pasha. And where do we know this name from? Talaat Pasha. And he was an Ottoman general, and he was the half-brother of Enver Pasha, who in turn was a military officer and leader of the 1908 Young Turk Revolution. So that's when they took over, these so-called Young Turks. And so he formed one third of the triumvirate known as the Three Pashas, along with Talaat Pasha and Jamal Pasha. So anybody who can think a little bit for themselves will come up with the necessary conclusion that Rudolf von Sebottendorf, who obviously hung out a significant amount of time with the half-brother of one of the three pashas, who, by the way, during World War II helped establish the Turkestan Legion of the SS of Nazi Germany, that he knew very well Talaat Pasha himself. And now that we've seen these connections, and of course they were all bektashi, Sufi Masons, yeah. And we'll see later that this Islam thing was just a cover firm, because in reality these Sufis were of another religion called Sabbateanism, but we'll look at this later. And the Bible, by the way, calls this the Jews that claim to be Jews but are the synagogue of Satan. And also, this is largely confirmed by Jesus' statement of Revelation chapter 2 that the throne of Satan was, maybe still is, who knows, in Pergamon, which is situated where today's Istanbul is, at least very close to it. Yeah. By the way, Constantinople, the capital of the Ottoman Empire, was also known prior to this as East Rome, and that was the as it's called, Constantinople, by Emperor Constantine of Rome. This was also capital of the Byzantine Empire, which preceded the Ottoman Empire. But anyway, what else was this Talaat Pasha into? He was one of the leaders of the Young Turks and ruled the empire during the Armenian genocide. So this guy had experience, right? He was the Ottoman government, also known as the Armenian Holocaust, and that was the Ottoman government's systematic extermination of 1.5 million Armenians, mostly citizens within the Ottoman Empire. So the starting date for this was 1915. So this guy has blood on his hands. I mean, to a very, very high degree. And, you know, at that time, this guy hangs out in Istanbul all the time, and then you can, which would take us too far, but I highly recommend you getting this book by a Turkish man called Aytun Altindal, called Behind the Mask of Hitler. Now, some parts of that book are fairly boring, but in the end of the book, he talks about the Thule Society, and he had access to some Turkish archives that he obviously looked through for years and years just to find some pieces of info, and he didn't find much, but it's nevertheless very interesting what you read in this book. And I had scanned some of this before, and I thought maybe I'll read some of it, but it's just gonna take way too long. But hold on, what is this? Our order is a Germanic order, and our loyalty is also Germanic. Our god is Wohlwater. His rune is the R rune, and the Trinity, Wotan. Viri is the unity of the Trinity. I didn't even know that they had a Trinity. Interesting. But what you'll see when you read this is that Istanbul was a hotbed of intelligence at that time of history, and that there was all kinds of intelligence agents gathering in Istanbul, and it looks like that was actually the center of planning world affairs as we know them, how they came about in the 1900s. And he found a lot of indicators to the fact that Sebottendorf never committed suicide in 1945. But like I said, it would take me too long to go through all this material. There's just too much. I mean, you can pause this video and probably maybe make screenshots and then read this stuff. But, you know, it'll show you all these connections also to the pashas. Franz von Pappen's diplomatic mission in Turkey, 1934-45. You read about a Pertev Pasha was Pappen's chief ally and guide in Turkish foreign and domestic policies. He was also a close friend of Cardinal Roncalli, the future Pope John the 23rd. While on his mission in Turkey during the war years, Sebottendorf and Burkhaus were active propagandists of a secret German project, later known as the Greater Deutschland, laid down by famous German strategist Tannenberg in 1911. This was a big plan, right? And the Catholic Church was right on top of it. And it also involved, here you read something about Mexico, and I mean, there's just kind of like these evil tribes uniting and saying, okay, let's get rid of all the Jews. That's kind of insane, but that's what really happened. It wasn't some nationalistic endeavor by some nationalistic Germans who happened to see the bad thing in the Jews and, but it's just amazing information that you'll find in here. So I just go back up so that if you want to, you can kind of pause this at your own liking and, read in it. And you'll see that Istanbul was the driving force behind this, and essentially the Vatican, right? The Vatican also organized through two Croatian agents who were Catholic priests the so-called red lines, where leading Nazis and SS members were given Swiss Red Cross passports to travel to South America, which is where they continued to live. So this whole Nazi empire never really ceased to exist, and rather it took over the world in intelligence circles to a large degree, and in science, because the leading scientists some of them were at first taken by the Soviets, and then as soon as the Americans saw that, they thought, we need some of these guys, lest the Soviets get them all. That's how the Cold War started, by the way. And, in the first operation called Project Paperclip, the CIA, the newly founded CIA under Allen Dulles, brought over these Nazi scientists, and Werner von Braun, and the results of the human experiments were continued in Project Artichoke, and then the secret drugging of American civilists in MK Ultra and of the soldiers in Vietnam War. This stuff never stopped. It literally makes a lot more sense to look at the Bible, where it tells you that a certain empire seemingly ceased to exist and then ascends out of the bottomless pit, which has characteristics of red color and is directed by a whore called Babylon the Great, which is a city on 7 hills and looks a lot like Rome. So, if you tie all this together in the end, you can make a good case that Rome is riding this Turkic tribe beast that had one of its heads wounded, which was the Ottoman Empire, because you had a lot of Turkic empires throughout the centuries, like the Mongols and all that. They all qualify as Turkic empires, and they were huge. If you look at the Mongol empires, like with Genghis Khan or the Huns and all this type of stuff, these were big empires, and one of the heads was wounded as if it was dead. And the beast, back in the day when John was there, was, and is not, it said, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit, because all this, as we will see, is also connected to the so-called Edomites, which Edom is the color red. And as I told you in the beginning, this is a very, very deep topic that you have to study from a biblical angle and look at history, and you'll see that the Ptolemaic Empire from Egypt that developed the Gnostic form of, quote, Christianity, unquote, is the one that finally merged into the Vatican, and that ancient Italian tribes like the Etruscans, with a very high likeliness, came from ancient Anatolia, which again is modern-day Turkey, and was back in time the seat of the Horites, with its chief Seir into whose family Esau married and produced offspring called Amalek. And we'll look at this a little more, but did I go all the way up here? So yeah, but that's a big book, so, or I mean, how thick is it? I have it here on my table. Let's see. It's 215 pages. So yeah, I can recommend it. There's also some, I don't know why I didn't scan these pictures that are in here. I'm looking over this right now, but it doesn't look like God wants me to go deeper into this right now, because there's some other stuff that we need to look at. So anyway, Sebottendorf, he was the connecting element starting the Thule Society. He was big friends with Pasha and the Pasha family. He was spiritually connected to him, being a Mason. Talaat was the head, the Grand Master of Turkish Masonry, which sees itself as significant to all the other Masonries and says that it's a ruling type of Freemasonry. We know the seat of Satan, as I mentioned, was in Pergamon, close to Istanbul. But very notably about Talaat is that this guy took off after he was unsuccessful in World War I and the Ottoman Empire collapsed, and he and a few other guys fled the Ottoman Empire, and this was organized by German military intelligence from Berlin, which is kind of crazy. I mean, if you want to research deeper in that direction, then you would have to look at another person who is called Alexander Parvus, who was a Russian, and he how do I best explain this? Oh, this is the German Wikipedia article, but he was member of the oldest German party, the Social Democrats, the SPD. And he was also in Istanbul, and he was connected, and he most likely was one of the guys that started this Young Turk revolution movement. Here you see him with Trotsky, yeah. And but that's the way that you would have to, that's the path that you would have to follow. Check out this guy, Alexander Parvus. Yeah. If you want to go deeper down that road. But with Pasha, he was a donmeh. Yeah, and that's what I said. They were a group of crypto-Sabbateans in the Ottoman Empire, and they actually still exist. There are many Turks that say that the donmeh are the ones that actually rule Turkey and Turkish intelligence in the background. And you know, it's ultra nationalistic as well. If you, for example, Google the Grey Wolves, who seek to reunite and reestablish a worldwide Turkish or of Turkic tribes ruled empire, you know, you can read about this also on Wikipedia. That, you know, this is what the Young Turks also attempted to do. They were trying to take over the world. And if you think about, if they were the ones that started this stuff in Nazi Germany, and if that's still alive and well, then guess who is the mover and shaker in the background? Do you recall that Erdogan, Turkish president, the other day said to the United States, if they're not careful, they're going to get an Ottoman slap in the face? I mean, what nation on earth would make statements like that, especially if they're a supposed ally of the U.S.? But it's just another side note. But this is a pan-Turkist organization, yeah, extended their area of operation into the post-Soviet states with Turkic and Muslim populations. And now you need to understand that Turkic doesn't mean Turkish, but it means Turkic as in Turan, right? So Turanism. And you need to bear in mind that this is Edom. It's an Edomite empire. And it stretches, and you're probably going to think, what is this guy talking about? You're probably going to have a hard time to follow along, but I'll show you on Google Maps. And I promise you it'll get, if you don't find this interesting right now, it'll get more interesting as we go along. So here you have Turkey, right, and Istanbul at the Golden Horn, and then the Turkic nations and the Turkic tribe, they spread all the way over here to northern China, right, Mongolia and northern China, and then down here. So that's essentially all these tribes that they seek to unite. These gray wolves. And their hand sign, let's put Erdogan, we'll probably find it. That's their hand sign. And where do you know this hand sign from? You know, that's the Turkish president right there. Turkey, right? Turkey is very underestimated, not mentioned a lot. And Pasha, so I told you he was able to flee to Germany, to Berlin, by the help of German military intelligence in, I believe it was 1918. Let's see. Armenian genocide. You know, they walked these people into the desert. Very cruel. They told them, you're just going to get, what's the English term? Resituated, like, you know, we're going to take you to a new home, so just follow us. And then they just walked them out in the desert. They're like, where are we going? And they said, you know, why do you care? Just keep walking. Until they died. Death march, right? Is that what you call it? But exile, here we go, fled the Ottoman capital in a German submarine on November 3rd, 1918 from Constantinople harbor to Berlin. And not only him, but only the other pashas, and I believe that that's what it says in this newspaper also. And then he actually got assassinated by an Armenian revenge organization called Operation Nemesis by Soghomon Tehlirian, something like that was his name, I think. Here he is. Soghomon Tehlirian. Yeah, that guy. He shot him. Even though Pasha received a new identity in Berlin and a new passport, he found him and he shot him at Hardenberg Street in Germany, in Berlin. And actually in Charlottenburg, which is a part of Berlin. And the court, it's like it also says here, found him innocent on grounds of temporary insanity because of traumatic experience he had gone through during the genocide. And I would say, I agree with the decision of the court, but I wouldn't have based it on traumatic experience. I would have said he killed a man that was responsible for the death of 1.5 million, and he deserved to be killed by one of the Armenians. I don't see any reason to say that this was not a justified execution of this very, very evil man. You know, and I wonder what kind of Germans would help a beast like that escape. And it's probably connected to these SPD social democrats from Parvus, who also brought these young Turks, or helped form this young Turk revolution in Turkey, you know. And that's all, man, if you delve into that, that's another head of all the Edomite empire. And it's so important to talk about this because you have all these Ethiopian type of Christians on the internet, these, or African American And they all say the Edomites is the white people. And, and they have no idea. The Edomites is the Turkic nations. It's nations that Esau intermingled with. So, does it mention... Trying to find one more thing. Yeah. He was buried in Berlin, in the Turkish cemetery. But in 1943, his remains were taken to Istanbul and reburied. And the German Wikipedia will tell you that Hitler ordered this. We don't have to go there. If you go there, you'll see it. So, and this was kind of like in a procession, like, with fires. And, they brought this corpse of this quote-unquote great man back to Istanbul, which makes you wonder what Hitler had with that guy. Why he would hold him in such high veneration. So that's the pashas, right? And they were bektashi. And I told you that he was also a donmeh. You can read about the bektashi order yourself. And that the donmeh were a group of crypto-Sabbateans from a guy called Shabtai Tzvi. And he declared himself Messiah in 1666 in Constantinople. And what happened was that the Sultan Mehmet, he said, okay, if you're the Messiah, then I'll shoot you tomorrow with an arrow in the head and you're not going to die because you're the Messiah, right? Or you can convert to Islam. So what he did was he converted to Islam. So that means that this guy who claimed to be the Messiah, this Shabtai Tzvi, became had the veneer of a Muslim. So you have this Islamic group that really was crypto, quote-unquote, Jews. Who knows if he had real Jewish blood, or was that maybe just these Jews from the Herodian dynasty? You see, this has so much depth. You can look back in the days of Jesus, King Herod, that was an Idumean and an Edomite dynasty that was brought to power by Rome because Herod's grandfather, Antipater the Idumean, helped Caesar in a battle. And that's why he was given rulership over Judah. But also the Ptolemaic Egyptians under Cleopatra had their fingers in all this. And also in the establishing of the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees. Like, this all ties together. You see that woman, that whore, riding that Edomite beast back then. Yeah? And so this Shabtai Tzvi, he formulated a strange doctrine. See, I didn't know this. His name literally meant the planet Saturn. Wow, I didn't know that. Which, to somebody that's a little familiar with mysticism, he'll recognize this right away, that Saturn, see, I'm segueing into all these things now. Saturn hexagram. I don't know if you've seen that. Saturn's hexagon. That was an interesting explanation that I read one day for the star of Ramphan being Saturn, right? And then you see this hexagon on one of the poles of Saturn, on the North Pole. And on the South Pole, guess what you see? That's the South Pole of Saturn. It's an eye. Or it looks like an eye. But anyway, that's just a side note. So, here we have Saturn, Shabtai, the supposed 1666 self-declared Messiah who had the following doctrine. We're only going to make God come back on earth if either everybody gets super holy and we'll invite him back, or alternatively, if everything gets so wicked and bad that God will come back to have to clean it up. And he said it's unlikely that we're going to achieve the first, so let's try and achieve the latter. And in order to do that, we have to turn around every commandment in the Bible and do the opposite. So let's go and have orgies, let's kill people, let's torture, let's do everything that God hates. And that's what this cult was all about. And I'll leave it to yourself to listen to all this. But he was successful. He convinced, I think, 1/3 of all Jews worldwide that he was the Messiah. So that was a big, big thing. It was not a minor issue. And like I said, this donmeh still exists. And that is what Sebottendorf was connected to. You know, the people that performed a burnt offering, tried to extinguish the Jewish race. Yeah, you can go deeper into that. You can listen to like Barry Chamish or Rabbi Marvin Entelman talk about these people. You know, I mean, they're not Christians, and they're probably going to tell you everything from a different viewpoint and angle, but you get a lot of information about this stuff when you listen to these radio shows where you can hear Barry, who's not alive anymore, talk about this. Also, another person that I haven't read anything of, but that apparently is one of the main sources for this, is Gershom Scholem. And he was a German-born Israeli philosopher, and he became the first professor of Jewish mysticism at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And he apparently wrote a lot about the Sabbateans and also their successors, or one of the branches that sprang off, which were the frankists. And there was this guy called Jacob Frank in today's Poland, who proclaimed himself to be the reborn Chaptai Tzvi. So he was the Messiah again, and he continued this practice now in Poland. And here comes now part of the connection to Edom also. Since Jacob Frank was, well, first of all, maybe, let's see, so Gershom Scholem talks about this Frankist doctrine. Oh yeah, and then you have Alexander Kraushaar. He also has a lot to say about Frank, and I think I have some screenshots from one of the books a little later. Frank had Gnostic philosophy, blah blah blah, Nietzsche. You know, I've been the incarnation of the Shekinah, the female. Yeah, right, you know. Talk about pride, but Frankism, if you go on the German Wikipedia again, do I still have this here? Yeah. You will read a lot more about this. And one of the things that it says, on the way to Esau, the cosmic big brother. So it says, Yud-He Vav-He is in Frankism the cosmic Esau, who has absolute freedom, or where we have absolute freedom. Since Jacob and Esau were brothers in the Bible, Yud-He Vav-He in Frankism is the bigger brother. And the Kabbalistic writings also ordered Jacob. Hold on. Schriften ordnen Jakob, der Okay, so the Kabbalistic scriptures, they ordered Frank to go to the cosmic Esau in a similar fashion as to the Yud-He Vav-He, God of the Old Testament, as they portray him. So, you know, they had kind of connected Esau to God, which is noteworthy to the least. And I had contacted a guy that had talked to Barry Chamish on a radio show, and you still see his email address, conspil.com@gmail.com. I don't know if that's still his email. Maybe you can try to write him, but that's his email that he gave away in the radio show. And he says, sure, you can talk, because I asked him what kind of Edomite connections he saw, and he says, you don't need to go any further than Jacob Frank's book, Sefer Devrei Ha'adon, translate from Hebrew freely, Book of the Master's Words, where he tells directly that his faith is what is called knowledge of Edom, and speaks of the gates of Edom, which all of his believers must go through. The knowledge of Edom is what he describes as the peak of his nihilism, and that means everything is nothing and you can do whatever you want, right? That's why they were just given to so much sin, because it don't matter, right? It's nihilism. Esau was a godless man, the Bible says. He didn't care about God. And it says that in Hebrews chapter 12, I believe verse 16. And there is a book by a guy called Jan Doctor, and he also writes about Jacob Frank, and he says that it has been quite well known since the publication in 1895 of Alexander Kraushaar. Yeah, so probably a good book to read if you want to know more about this. But let's see if I can find this. Does this do a... Because I remember that. Okay, so it's finding something. It's finding freedom. Edom. Now you have the honor of seeing that the third day is coming, and from this brightness will come. This third step or day was entry into the Catholic Church, to find the truth of salvation hidden in it, a truth which he named Da'at HaKadosh Shel Edom, the holy knowledge of Edom. This knowledge was hidden in the cult of the Holy Virgin, a cult he presented as a falsified image of an important truth. According to Frank, the Catholics were aware of the holiness of Yasna Gora, which was a real Mount Zion. Now, isn't that crazy? So they say, yeah, that cult of a Holy Virgin in the Catholic Church, that's the real deal, right? That contains that holy knowledge of Edom. And they say that's just kind of a painted with a falsified image of, nevertheless, an important truth, which makes you wonder if it's true that what the medieval book of Yashar says, that Esau, when he came back from hunting, was exhausted and sold his birthright because he thought that Nimrod's followers would kill him, because he just came back from killing Nimrod, the king of Babylon, and took over his empire. But, who knows if that has any merit. Because they worship that queen of heaven, right? Semiramis. And I think there is more, but this was also quoted here from Kraushaar, right? Page 357. So probably a good book to read, to know a little more what was going on, but symbolism. So, and also this Yasna Gora is probably an interesting place to visit and look for some symbolism, since they say that is the true Mount Zion. From the Shekinah was to appear, and from which living waters were to go out. That's insane, and that's not a minor thing. The road of salvation first leads to captivity, and in order to climb up, one had first to descend to the bottom of the abyss. And that's what they say, right? Their illumination comes from direct experience of good and evil, like the snake said in the garden. And that's why first you go in the pit, you become this satanic evil person, and you experience all these bad things to do and to see probably, and I don't even want to know what all that is. And then that'll supposedly take you up the road to the kind of highest heaven there, right? So that's the Edomite thinking and way. And like I said, that's how they said that they could bring God back to earth, by becoming so evil, yeah. And I'm sure you'll find this book yourself online. This was, let me go back up home. Jan Dr. Jacob Frank, a Jewish heresiarch and his messianic doctrine. So, this was also an interesting article, since these people all went to Tibet. I don't know how much merit this has, but he says that Gautama Buddha derives his name from Gautam and Reuel of the Edomite genealogy. If you want to read more, that was by Dr. Leni Srinivasan. These words speak of the past. You know, in that sense, Buddhism would be the spiritual elite of Edom, somewhere back there in northern China, or, you know, kind of connected to it in some way or the other. Who knows? I don't have all the answers. So we talked about all that, and like I said, these are all strong indicators that something is going on. And you know, I could make this a 5-hour thing, because as you see, if I browse through all this, I could now take you back through history to Cleopatra and the Herodians and make the connection with the Edomites. But, you know, I just don't have the time. You can do all that yourself if you want to know more. But one last thing that I find noteworthy is that the Targum, which were Aramaic translations of the Bible, says in Lamentations 4:21, "Rejoice and be of good cheer, Constantinople, city of wicked Edom, which is built in the land of Armenia with crowds from the people of Edom. Retribution is about to come upon even you, and the Parkivi will destroy you, and the accursed cup shall pass to you, and you shall become drunk and exposed. And after this, your iniquity will be finished, O congregation of Zion, and you will be freed from the hands of the King Messiah and Elijah the high priest, and the Lord will no longer exile you. And at that time I will punish your iniquities. Wicked Rome, built in Italy and filled with crowds of Edomites." Yeah? So that's not a new concept, that Italy and Rome is of Edomite origin. And like I said, if you trace back these Etruscans who worshipped on the Vatican Mount way before the Vatican was built there, or the Catholic Church even existed, as a graveyard, which was Vaticus, meant to prophesy in the Etruscan language, you'll see that this is a older cult than the faith that was given by Jesus Christ, and they just, as the Whore of Babylon has always done, took this on as their final veneer, right? So in the Bible, in Numbers 24, you read about the Messiah that will come, the Star of Jacob, and scepter shall rise out of Israel and shall smite the corners of Moab and destroy all the children of Sheth, right? Set, the Egyptian god that miraculously appeared in Egypt. And you have to look at this because it's important for the following reason. It says here, Edom shall be a possession, and Seir also. So Seir and Esau both had offspring by the name Amalek, because Esau's firstborn Eliphaz married Timnah, who was Seir's daughter, right? And I'm trying to think, I don't want to say anything that's wrong. Eliphaz the Temanite, Eliphaz was Esau's firstborn, and Seir also had a son. We can turn there real quick, since I apparently can't think of it to enough detail not to say the wrong thing. Genesis 36 is where you find it. And then you say Timnah. Here she is. So Lotan's sister was Timnah, and Lotan was actually the firstborn of Seir, right? So Seir the Horite, Lotan, his son. So his daughter married Esau's firstborn Eliphaz, and they had a child called Amalek. And that's where you get the Amalekites from, who again and again tried to extinguish the Jews. And it says in, if I'm not mistaken, Genesis, was it in Genesis or Deuteronomy? I think it's in Deuteronomy 17:16. Oh, no, I wrote it wrong. Let's do it another way. Let's just say war Amalek. Exodus 17:16. Because the Lord has sworn he will have war with Amalek from generation to generation, right? So God has war with these people. God mentions that Edomite tribe several times in the Bible, also in the book of Obadiah. And you can find this in Ezekiel 25. You find it in Isaiah 35. You find it in Isaiah 34. You find it in Jeremiah 49. Read all these scriptures. I highly, highly advise you to read them. And to bear in mind that this talks about the Edomite tribe that came about from the mixture of Esau and Seir the Horite, who was situated in modern-day Turkey and who brought about all these Turkic nations, of which Amalek apparently is the head, because Amalek's king, Agag, right? Haman, you know Haman, the Agagite, was the one in Book of Esther who tried to, guess what, extinguish the Jewish race, which is why prior to that God told Saul, commit genocide on the Amalekites, get rid of them. And Saul didn't do it. And God knew that the Amalekites were all about trying to extinguish the Jews. Always. Always, right? And that's why God told them to do this. Here it is, Deuteronomy 25:19. When the Lord has given thee for an inheritance to possess it, that land, right? You shall blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. Thou shalt not forget it. And they didn't do it. So Agag, the king of the Amalekites, that became a title. Yeah, and that's Haman the Agagite. So when you read Agag, bear in mind that is king of Amalek. And guess what? In Numbers 24, where it talks about the end times, it tells you that the Messiah, the king, shall be higher than Agag. Okay? And if you now take a Septuagint and you go to the same verse, Numbers 24:7. Oh, what did I? Zribnum. Why did it write it backwards? How did I do that? It looks like there's a button combination to turn this around. But while I'm saying this, I'm just thinking, you know, this turning around of God's commandments, like everything twisting it the opposite way. Not with what I was writing, but that's a satanic concept for a lot of things, twisting things around. Genesis 1, but I wanted to go to Numbers 24:7, so maybe I have to type this in the other way. Numbers 24:7. So it's searching, and you'll see in a second where this is going to lead us to, and then we can kind of end this video, and I'll leave it up to your further research. But here, if you know some Greek letters, you'll recognize something here. Gog. It doesn't say Agag in the Septuagint. It says Gog. Gog. In Ezekiel, a king of Magog, a land of the remote north. So, and this actually appears twice in the Septuagint, I believe. I don't want to do a word search now. It's all good. You'll find it if you want to. But, so now, if you go back to that passage here in the Bible, his king shall be higher than Gog. That chief king of the Amalekites reappears here in Ezekiel 38 as Agag, king, in the land of Magog, Turkey, Meshech, Tubal, Gomer. You've been lied to. This isn't Russia. This is tribes that are spread throughout parts of the ex-Soviet Union, yes, and most likely this Alexander Parvus was part of it that we saw before. Most likely these young Turks, this Pasha has stuff to do with it. Most likely they had established a stronghold there in Berlin somehow and still apparently operate from it and with it. Segueing into the SS, the CIA also went to the Soviet, went to South America with the Nazis. It looks like we have a beast that had a head wounded. They'll eventually try to extinguish the Jews one last time here in Ezekiel 38, which is the empire of the Edomites, right? And where do you hear your pastor talk about, or at least, make this a topic of a Bible study instead of for the 5th million times drinking the milk of Romans 8, for example? You have to get to a point where you actually analyze what's going on without the distraction of all these conspiracy theories that are floating around on YouTube. Look at the real thing. There is something in here that has a lot of merit. And like I said, it didn't come about by looking at one thing or looking at a video and being like, oh, well, yeah, that might be true, but there is so much depth in this, and you see here that the beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, and shall go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names are not written in the book of life. It looks like this exactly is, on a spiritual component, that type of Sabbatean Sufism, that worship of the beast in order to kind of bring about God coming back to earth, So that's maybe where people get their idea from, that it's okay to take the mark of the beast if you just kind of temporarily battle on Satan's side, because, right, all you do is bring God back to earth. Seems like that's how they fool at least some part of people into this stuff, but essentially it's Mystery Babylon the Great, they're from Rome, riding that beast, which is, according to the Targums, filled with the hordes of Edom. And, go and study the shepherd kings, the Hyksos, which took over the Egyptian dynasty after the Pharaoh fell in the Red Sea when Israel left Egypt. There came a different dynasty. They brought in a strange god called Seth, the storm god, a very evil god they brought into Egypt. And they took over Egypt with no opposition, because of course the army was sunk in the Red Sea. And guess who was waiting for Israel in the desert to kill all the weak ones and the children? That was Amalek, the Amalekites, right? So, there is merit to the things that I'm saying. And I'm telling you that empire has not ceased, and it's still around, and it's because Saul didn't do his job. And we're going to see that this is what is going to bring about the Antichrist with their Satan worship. And, It's, yeah. Something that's not mentioned